John Babacom Lee. John Lee, an English servant, was sentenced to death by hanging in 1885 for the murder of his employer. But something incredible happened. The trap door failed. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Each time, the mechanism simply didn't work, even though it had been tested beforehand. Authorities saw it as an act of divine intervention and commuted his sentence to life imprisonment. Lee was eventually released and lived the rest of his life known as the man they couldn't hang. Wenceslao Moguel was a Mexican soldier captured in 1915 during the Mexican Revolution. He was sentenced to death by firing squad. 9 bullets were fired into his body, and 1 final shot was aimed at his head, the so-called mercy shot. Against all odds, Moguel survived. He played dead and managed to escape. He later became known as El Fusilado, the executed man who lived. Anne Green. In 17th-century England, Anne Green was accused of infanticide after giving birth to a stillborn child. She was hanged in 1650. Her body was sent to Oxford for medical dissection. But when doctors began their work, they noticed signs of life. Green had survived the execution. Her sentence was overturned, and she went on to have more children. Many saw her survival as a miracle. Willie Francis. In 1946, 17-year-old Willie Francis was sentenced to death by electric chair in Louisiana, USA. However, the chair had been incorrectly set up. Francis survived the first attempt, screaming, "Take it off! Let me breathe!" The case sparked nationwide debate. Nevertheless, the execution was carried out again a year later, and this time it was successful. Joseph Samuel, a Jewish convict in early colonial Australia, was sentenced to hang in 1803 for robbery and murder. During his execution, the rope broke, not once, but 3 times. Each time the noose snapped. The governor saw this as a divine sign and commuted his sentence to life imprisonment. Samuel's case remains one of Australia's most extraordinary legal events. Elizabeth Proctor. During the infamous Salem witch trials in 1692, Elizabeth Proctor was sentenced to death for witchcraft, but she was pregnant at the time. Her execution was postponed until after the baby was born. By then, public opinion had shifted, and the trials were losing support. Elizabeth was released and lived out the rest of her life. Her sentence was never carried out. Zhang Ruifang was falsely accused of being a counter-revolutionary during China's Cultural Revolution. She was publicly humiliated, tortured, and sentenced to death. But just before the execution could take place, a political shift saved her life. She survived the purges and later shared her story, a harrowing testimony from a dark chapter in Chinese history. Ewan MacDonald. Ewan MacDonald was a Scottish Jacobite rebel in the early 1700s. After his capture, he was sentenced to hang, but the rope failed. Back then, such failures were often seen as signs from God. As a result, MacDonald was granted a reprieve, and his sentence was commuted to imprisonment. Francisca Ballesteros. Francisca Ballesteros was a Spanish woman who poisoned several members of her family in the early 2000s. She attempted to kill herself by overdose, essentially trying to escape justice through self-execution. However, she survived, was arrested, and sentenced to life in prison. Her failed suicide marked a chilling attempt to avoid her punishment. Maggie Dickson. In 1724, Maggie Dickson from Edinburgh, Scotland, was hanged for concealing the death of her newborn child. After being declared dead, her body was placed in a coffin and taken for burial. But along the way, people heard knocking from inside the coffin. Maggie was alive. Legally, the execution was considered complete, and she couldn't be hanged again. She lived many more years and became locally famous as Half-Hangit Maggie.